to you with Ellen this book. Ellen and I first met while studying theatre history in Copenhagen during the 90s. Back then, performance art was regarded as a relic of the past. Typically, text about performance art was accompanied by a photo, and occasionally we had the opportunity to view a grainy video clip. This all changed when we relocated to Berlin and could attend live performance art events on a weekly basis. In 2004, we established Live Art Denmark, an organization committed to exploring performance art and documentation of it. During our studies 13 years ago, the prevailing view aligned with Peggy Phelan's assertion that performance art is ephemeral and cannot be saved, recorded, or documented. According to this perspective, performance art exists solely in the present moment and only for the body physically present. Despite the stance of many performance theorists who deny the validity of reproduction, the art form is nonetheless encompassed by structures that rely on documentation. It's always seemed paradoxical that while we were engaged in the study of performance art, we were simultaneously told that it could not be studied because we were not present at the original events. In addition to documenting our own projects, we actually investigate various methodologies for documentation. We ask questions like, what object should the documentation of performance art fulfill? What aspect of the performance are we aiming to document? The idea, atmosphere, audience interaction, or content? Perhaps the art object or something else? Why is it essential to preserve the work? And who is the intended audience? Should the documentation be accessible to the public, to a selected group of people, or to an individual as a personal record? Are we documenting for archival purposes or to engage new audiences? Can the documentation itself be a form of art? Should documentation be transient? And what is the best media for a given performance? We have filmed and photographed a vast number of works, accumulating close to 20 terabytes of data. Our homepage features details, text, and photos from over 400 works presented by our organization, with more than 280 of these available on our YouTube channel. And we have 100 more of those in our VR goggles. The philosopher Alain Bourdieu writes about the passion for the real, describing how avant-garde artists have seen themselves as embodying this passion. Historically, performance artists have chosen to work in real time with genuine materials, avoiding imitation or mimicry. But before expanding on that, let's return to the beginning of Live Art Denmark. 20 years ago in Kanonhallen, we showed our first festival. The first work we showed was on November the 13th, so it's 20 years and 4 days ago. I'm very happy, we're 20 years old. So we're adults finally. The work was looking for a husband with an EU passport, a performance by the Serbian artist Tanja Ostovic. In August 2000, Ostovic published an advertisement with the title, "Looking for a husband with an EU passport." She corresponded with over 500 applicants from around the world. After 6 months exchange with a German artist, she arranged a public meeting in front of the Museum of Contemporary Art in Belgrade in 2001. 1 month later, they officially married, and Ostovic moved to Germany, part of the EU. Her performance lecture detailed the project up to the marriage. She needed to be married for 5 years to stay in the EU. The project spanned several years and would have reached a limited audience without documentation. In 2006, Felix Ausländer wrote in The Performativity of Performance Documentation that the act of documentation an event as a performance is what constitutes it as such. Without the possibility of documenting, Ostovic might not have undertaken the project, or we would probably have heard very little of it. In a performance lecture, Ostrovitz added new dimensions to the work, making it a challenge to distinguish between the live performance and its documentation. As the critical theorist Simone Ustorf writes in Performing the Archive, in many performances and real-time events, the documentation of artwork often ended up exchanging places with the works themselves. Documentation, usually made in different media from that of the original work, went on to perform its own engagement with the audience and often to the mass media. Art's emphasis on real things, real gestures in real life, as a result, eventually transferred the question of representation to the realm of documentation. During the last 20 years, we have examined which format bits represent different performances and whatever it's possible to transfer work's realness to another medium. Walter Benjamin writes in the artwork in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction that the aura of the original artwork mostly disappeared when reproduced. The aura of performance art is it here and now, I would say. If a performance is to be kept alive in documentation, it needs to be turned into something other than a recording. It must become a new artwork. An artwork in its own right. It means that the film, text, photo, object can stand alone and can be experienced without the references to the work that it originates from. My favorite Danish artist in that regard is Henrik Vestergaard. Here's a photo from a performance for video that he did for us 10, 12 years ago. I cannot show your work because it's been sold to a collector and I don't own you the right. I don't own the rights. But Vestergaard creates performance, and he always, before doing the performance, he always knows it's gonna end up like something different in a video documentation. The performance isn't the end point of the work. The end point of the work is probably the video afterwards. And those two, you cannot separate them. Okay. But before I talk about how we try to create works from documentation that can stand on their own, let's go one step back. Again, 20 years and 3 days ago. The second performance we presented was Wagner Feigl Forschung, Festspiele, Encyclopedia of Performance Art, 1st December 2004. Otmar Wagner and Florian Feigl introduced their project by addressing the challenge performance artists face in determining whatever their material has already been used by others. To tackle this, they created the Encyclopedia of Performance Art, a live performance attempt to catalog all performance art materials. For instance, they dedicated a substantial chapter to the use of tomatoes, exploring which artists have employed tomatoes and the distinction between using tomatoes versus ketchup in performance art. The work was well received by the academic community, which recognized numerous potential applications for the encyclopedia. However, Wagner and Feigl never intended to create a comprehensive, definitive encyclopedia of performance art. Their goal was to inspire both themselves and others. Indeed, by exposing how possible it is to be comprehensive, they were questioning the stages of documentation in system of knowledge exchange. Here is some photos from our most recent festival at Aachen in November. Over the years, we have worked intensely with video documentation, photo, text, and leftover from performance. But because things are run fast, I need to skip these, and on Ben's request, oh, that's difficult. But before jumping before jumping to talk about VR with virtual reality, which I was supposed to, I will stay a second by scores and reenactment. Because the last couple of years we have worked with scores as documentation in our Playing Up, 50 Days of Things, Kaboom, and Daily Life. Marina Abramovich once said, the only real way to document a performance art piece is to re-perform the piece itself. Her Freeing the Voice is included in Playing Up. Playing Up is a game that consists of 32 classical performance artworks, and we have helped create a gender edition add-on to it, and we have also created this our own Nordic expansion set. And Playing Up is put on playing cards, so you can go home and you can perform or play yourself. It's a description of the artwork and how to do it yourself. Yeah, you can buy it afterwards for 50 bucks if you want to. Or it can be bought on Bounce, London. Yes. Freeing the Voice was originally performed in Budapest 1967. Abramovich laid on her back with her head tilted so her face was fully visible to the audience and the camera and began to scream. And I think we should try that now, because you have been here for 1.5 hours and you probably need to get something out. And if you don't like loud sounds, I recommend you use your 2 fingers and put them in your ears. And then I'll ask all of you to scream out your lung, just to get it out for a minute or something. And I'll come. 3, 2, 1. Doing it yourself is to give a totally new perspective to the performance that you embody in the screen, instead of just reading about it or seeing it on video. Our newest work for the stage, we basically reenact 26 classical performance art pieces. This is a program for the show, and the performance is called Daily Life, the world's most boring show. And it's a show that is intended for kids from 5 years old, from 5 years. And of course, kids that they don't care about performance feminist theory from the 70s. And they don't have to. It has to, the goal is to create a work that stands on its own, that works without having to use references. But we do have this program at the show, if anybody's interested, to where we have what we are reenacting in the show, but it should hopefully work on its own. And that also goes for our 2 other shows, Kaboom and 50 Dangerous Things. All of them are combined of classical performance art pieces. So this is not our own archive we dig into, this is other artists' archive we have got into, and then we try to reactivate. After years of working with various strategies of documentation, we embraced virtual reality in 2016. Of all the documentation methods we have tried, the technology comes closest to simulating reality. In addition to capturing the work itself, VR allows the viewer to experience part of the atmosphere in the room and the interaction with the audience. Also, the viewer enjoys the same freedom as in the real world. You could look around, you could look at the person next to the sky of the artist. If I was in this space, I would constantly look at all these wonderful ropes all the time. I really, really like them a lot. It's fantastic. It's give this black box and holding the character. I haven't seen it before. It's brilliant. Oh, but it has nothing. In VR, you can decide where you look at, and nobody will blame you for it if you don't look at the performance artist, because the performance is boring. Our first VR archive is hosted on a YouTube channel and can be experienced with a normal phone if you don't have any goggles. Our second archive we have on Oculus standalone goggles at our gallery, Friesland, and it holds about 13 works. And we bring that when we travel to Cameroon, Toronto, Stockholm, and other places, because it's a pocket-sized festival we can bring, and we can present performance art, mainly Danish performance art, to people elsewhere. And at the same time, we bring our camera and film new performances that we can bring back home to Denmark. 4 years ago, we started Friesland Gallery in Nordhavn. One of the main aims of Friesland was to let artists explore virtual reality and create site-specific works for VR, so that the audience would be placed in the same place as the camera, the body present in the same space as the recording, the object from the performance present, but the artist not physically present. That was much more interesting than just doing the documentation in VR. So we started to create VR performance in a wide variety of spaces, with the only restriction that the viewer being that the audience member is required to experience the piece from the same position as the camera. That would in this case be here, with the audience sit with the goggles on, and we go back. This is the camera, so they would sit here. It looks like very high, but it's actually in seating position. And this, they will go out to the sea in Nordhavn. This work is a work by Tom Casani. We did it in 2022 at Doc 1, as you can see. And his performance was physically quite demanding and could not be repeated. But because the headsets, they were present all day long, people could experience the performance without exhausting the artist. In 24, we invited the artists Kira O'Reilly, Simon Nørgaard, and Molly Haslam to create a performance for site-specific camera audience position at Underhuset at Husets Teater. Together with Toaster, the festival we created with them called Managing Discomfort. Our exploration has shown us different artworks require different strategies of documentation. But before deciding on the method, one should consider the essence of the work and its intended purpose. The documentation should strike a balance in terms of amount of information it reveals, not too little and not too much. This approach will encourage viewers to engage with the work by allowing them to fill in the gaps with their own imagination. I'm not sure that also goes for VR. It seems like a bit of an, it definitely goes for photo and some ways of documentation, maybe not for VR, for virtual reality. It is also essential to determine whether the documentation should function as a new artwork. If so, the execution should be integrated in the original work from the outset. And again, that was the reason for establishing Friesland 4 years ago. Right now in Friesland, we have a British artist called Rosie Gibbons that you can come, and you're welcome to come and visit, see her installation, video work, and at the same time you can also visit our second VR performance archive. You can also do that on January the 12th, where we present a new work for virtual reality by Jesse Kleeman. And the same evening we'll show, or say afternoon, we'll show a new performance by Franziska Sigrid from Norway. At present, we are reworking our recent experiments with site-specific VR performance to become a smaller part of the new venue, because this will be our last Friesland Live event. We will shut down the gallery in Nordhavn and move somewhere else in the spring. Last but not least, we did 2 years ago, we did ask Hesselholdt and Mailang to create a performance for video, for virtual reality. And that work will be part of an exhibition at Sydhavn Station. I think it's going to open on the 9th of January. Thank you.